laid out in a really easy to read format.
And this is great because, it allows us to kind of compare the different companies side by side.
Yeah.
And see, where the opportunities are.
So if we take a look at that table,
Mm-hmm.
we see that, AIFF had a recent price drop, but it's predicted to rise over the next 3 months.
Okay.
But it is flagged as a short-term sell.
Right.
Conquer experienced that surge after the positive news,
Right.
then a pullback, but the expectation is that it's going to continue to go up. ICCT had that massive gain,
Yeah.
but it's significantly overbought.
Right.
So there's a high risk of a correction.
Yeah, and that's something that investors need to be really aware of.
Yeah.
Just because a stock has gone up a lot.
Doesn't mean it's going to keep going up.
Exactly.
And then NMAX is riding the wave of its recent IPO.
Right.
But it's highly volatile,
Yeah.
so, it could go up, it could go down.
Absolutely.
And then finally, RSLS is also overbought
Right.
after a huge jump, but there's that anticipated pullback,
Right.
even though there is some good news for the company.
So really a mixed bag there.
Yeah.
Different companies, different drivers.
Yeah, and I think it really speaks to, the complexity of the market.
Absolutely.
And the importance of, doing your research and understanding the different factors that are at play.
And, it's also a good reminder that, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to investing.
Right.
What might be a good investment for one person might not be a good investment for another person.
So it's been a great discussion today.
It has.
We covered a lot of really interesting companies, and, we saw how the market can react to news, both positive and negative.
Absolutely.
And we also saw how, sometimes the market can move just based on speculation and hype.
And, I think it's really important for listeners to kind of, take all of this information in.
Yeah.
And really think about, what it means for their own investment decisions.
Absolutely. And I think a really good question for, our listeners to ask themselves is, given all of this information that we've talked about today, what single piece of information do they think would be most crucial for them to actually make a good decision?
A good informed decision.
Yeah, because, we've talked about a lot of different things.
Yeah, we have.
And it can be overwhelming.
It can be.
But if you can just focus on that one key piece of information, it can really help to clarify things. So I think that's a good place to leave it for today.
Yeah, I think so too.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Sounds great.
Healthcare companies often move differently than the broader market. Shorting health companies specifically might not provide a sound hedge against overall market movements, since they tend to have their own dynamics and influences. So, using healthcare companies as a hedge might not yield as effective protection as expected.